Hey guys, welcome to One Mind Brainwaves, a weekly forum where we discuss the science surrounding brain health and mental health challenges. I'm Laurie Hernandez, guest hosting for Brandon Staglin this week. Today's topic is athlete stress and traumatic brain injury, also known as TBI. A new NFL season is underway. Football, joining other professional sports in a year unlike any other. The coronavirus pandemic has also forced the postponement of this year's planned Summer Olympic Games to 2021, and it has changed the way athletes live, work, train, and think, myself included. In a few minutes, we're going to talk with a professional squash player and sports writer about the variety of stresses athletes face. We'll also talk with a leading researcher about traumatic brain injuries. But first, a song that evokes an athlete's courage and resolve, but also the mental and physical bruises that come with competition. Simon and Garfunkel's The Boxer. Here now to perform it is singer-songwriter and Steinway & Sons piano artist, Jeanne Newhall. Jeanne, welcome.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So happy to see you.
Oh, I'm so happy to see you too and to meet you virtually. It's like everything's through Zoom nowadays. So thanks for chatting with me today.
You're welcome, and I'm really just honored to be a guest on the program. Big advocate of health and athletics. So,
then this is perfect. So now, many people may be surprised to learn that a classically trained pianist has an acclaimed body of work that includes songs by the Indigo Girls, the Rolling Stones, and U2. How did your musical universe become so vast?
Just really. I look at it like the classical background was a springboard for all kinds of music because I love all kinds of music. Yes, I started in classical and my degree is in piano performance, but I sang in choirs in church and school, from a young age, and just really got into jazz and rock and roll and soul music. So I just kind of look at myself as, embracing a lot of different kinds of music. That's as long as it's good, and that's very subjective. So
I feel that. Did somebody introduce you to certain kinds of music that you fell in love with, or did it come from you being drawn to it?
Good question. Yes, I mean, I almost left college and not finishing my senior year because I've had a friend and he came over with some Herbie Hancock albums, and I just fell in love with the freedom and improvisational aspect of that. And of course, I was ready to jump out of college and start playing and emerging myself in this whole new way of looking at music, which was really the absence of the tactile music. And so yes, that was a big thing when that happened, because I fell in love with jazz. But then after even growing up, when I was through practicing Bach and Bartok and Brahms and Mozart, I played everything from musicals, jazz standards from the 40s and 50s, 30s, and just got into all kinds of pop tunes at the same time. So I think I was educating myself along the way. But the advantage to having that background, like maybe you have a ballet background or something that a teeny weeny. It sets you up for whatever you might encounter technically, and also that lovely word we love to use, discipline. It sets you up to really get through a lot of other types of obstacles.
Wow. I mean, to hear that you almost dropped out of college is quite interesting, considering just how you mentioned discipline, and it seems like being kind of focused and organized is really a big part of you. So thank you for sharing that, your catalog.
Don't quit, right? I mean, try to finish. If you start something, try to finish it if it's worth finishing. And I think just the idea of finishing was important. Maybe the degree, because I made a decision not to go on in classical music, but just finishing and getting that degree was a huge boost, for the inner self.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially my age, can relate to that. And hearing to stick with it and to not give up is something that I think we all need to hear quite a few times, especially this year. So thank you. Your catalog also features a wide array of original works. So when you compose, what inspires you to do so?
When I compose, what was the last part of the question?
What inspires you? Yeah.
What inspires me? Oh, well, there's many sources. In singer-songwriting, I think, and even composition of instrumental, this might sound a little weird, but a broken heart, other people's broken hearts, because if you're a composer, you're always tuning in to other people's existence and life. So you can kind of live through them. I've written songs about other people that I care about and what they've gone through. Loss, of course, is a great theme in many, many songs. Not because I don't see it as like it's a downer. It's just that it's somehow, when we connect and we communicate with our hearts, and you can do that through music, and a song about loss, can be very healing. Probably the other big inspiration would be nature. I went on a songwriting sabbatical up in Northern California near Trinidad. I don't know if you are familiar with it up there, but it's gorgeous. And just surrounded in, deep redwoods, the Pacific Ocean on one side, and lots of, beautiful birds and animals. So, yeah, nature. I want to go on another sabbatical, but I have to wait. So
I hope you get to go on one soon, because that sounds beautiful. It also sounds like we have an empath amongst us. So, I mean, it's not weird at all that you would draw from heartbreak. I got to do a lot of creative writing this year, since we had a lot more time on our hands than I anticipated. And heartbreak is a very good way to be creative. So I feel like I get to share that with you.
Thank you
the
for
pure.
saying that.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just thanking you for, like I said, kind of plugging into what I said, because we all have all these emotions that they're not unique to each of us. It's very shared.
It's so interesting how a lot of times, especially when it comes to emotions that feel very heavy, it's like our head gets big in the sense that we think we're the only ones who have gone through something as heavy as that, not realizing that we're all pretty connected. It may not be the same situation, but the feeling is shared. It's mutual. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I feel ya.
Well, so maybe later you can tell me about your broken heart and I can sing a song to you. Or
I would love that so much.
Maybe I could write a song about your broken heart.
I got you. Oh, listen, I got you for content for days.
Well, that's what happens when you're 20, right? You turn 20?
Yeah, I'm 20.
Okay, well, you're right where you should be. That's all I have to say about that.
Thanks. Switching gears a little, the pure beauty of your voice is just, it's such an interesting contrast to the gritty themes portrayed in The Boxer. So why did you decide to include The Boxer on your most recent album? And what was your vision for the song?
Another great question. I've admired Paul Simon. I think he'll go down as, one of the greatest songwriters of the 20th century, perhaps the greatest, but I don't know how you can measure that. But I've, followed a lot of his music, learned a lot of his songs, and then there was an opportunity to do a Paul Simon tribute. His birthday's in August. He's a Leo. And I was asked to take part in this tribute up in the Central Coast of California. And there's a very active group called Songwriters at Play. So they were putting on this tribute, and they, asked me what I wanted to sing. And, I started looking hard at the Boxer because I thought for sure somebody else, usually there's like 7 or 8 artists that participate, but as it would be, nobody wanted the Boxer because I asked right away if I could sing it. Because as I was getting into it, exactly what you asked me struck me like, okay, this is a gritty, the lyrics are specific. It's about, he writes in first person until the last verse, then he goes into third person, and he talks about the Boxer, and then he comes back to himself in the end, but it just had such resonating, I know that's an overused, almost cliched word, but it just hit home so hard, because whatever you see on the outside is not what's on the inside. And so that grit is coming, that's what's in the inside, whether you're female, male, whatever you are, it's there inside, and that will to endure, getting knocked down. So that's how I connected to the song The Boxer. And then I performed it live, a couple times, and then I wanted to include it on this recent EP. So I wanted to leave it, though, very sparse and minimalistic as a contrast to the original. So we did that. My guitarist that I've worked with the last couple of years, he's in Japan, so I've toured there 6 times. He's been here 5 times, and we've toured, and we have recorded a few different things together. So he is on the original recording if you ever do hear it. But otherwise, it's, just pretty bare bones.
It sounds absolutely wonderful. And I think for everybody who's watching and listening, we'd all love to hear you sing a little bit. So would you mind singing for us?
No, I would love to. Thank you. I am just a poor boy, though my story's seldom told. I have squandered my resistance for a pocket full of mumbles, such are promises, all lies and jest. Still a man hears what he wants to hear, and he disregards the rest. When I left my home and my family, I was no more than a boy in the company of strangers, in the quiet of a railway station, running scared, laying low, seeking out the poorer quarters where the ragged people go, looking for the places only they would know. Asking only a workman's wages, I came looking for a job, but I got no offers. Just to come on from the whores on 7th Avenue. I do declare there were times when I was so lonesome, I took some comfort there. Ooh, la la la. And I'm laying out my winter clothes and wishing I was gone, going home, where the New York City winters aren't bleeding me, leading me. I'm going home. In the clearing stands a boxer and a fighter by his trade, and he carries the reminders of every glove that laid him down or cut him till he cried out in his anger and his shame. I am leaving, but the fighter still remains.
Wow.
Holy moly. Oh my goodness, Jeannie, you are something else. Can I get you singing every song in the world on a vinyl? Can I have that? Just this one thing, you know?
You pick the songs, I'll do it.
Yes. Oh man, I mean, I'm kind of speechless. I think you brought all of us somewhere else. That was so well done. You have such a gift, and I thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Thank you. You're so sweet. Just to see you smile makes me happy.
Thank you for coming on here and taking the time to talk with me and to sing with me. It's appreciated.
Thank you. I look forward to our guests after me.
Woo. So speaking of our guests, perfect segue. Joining us now to discuss the stresses competitive athletes face, including the pressure, the threat of injury, and this year, worries about illness. Dr. David Okonkwo is a professor of neurological surgery and director of the Neurotrauma Clinical Trials Center at the University of Pittsburgh. He's also a member of the medical staff of the Pittsburgh Steelers football team. Woo, go Steelers! Wow. Rob Dinerman is a professional squash player, sports writer, and historian of racket sports. Also, to everyone listening, please feel free to post your questions for our guests at any time. Now, David and Rob, welcome to Brainwaves. How are you guys doing?
All good.
Fantastic.
Oh my goodness.
Very, very difficult act to follow. So thank you very much for that.
I'm still getting my mind around what a great song that was. Great job, Jeannie.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It really was beautiful. Oh my goodness. So David, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Viewers may have heard of traumatic brain injury, TBI, but are still not really sure what it is. Can you define it for us? And how often is it related to sports and chronic traumatic CTE? What's the last word?
Encephalopathy.
Wow.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Yes. Traumatic brain injury is an umbrella term that is used to describe a very wide spectrum of injuries resulting from trauma to the head. And it runs the full gamut from life-threatening problems. So turns out it's the most common cause of death under the age of 45 in the Western world is to die of a traumatic brain injury. So there are life-threatening versions, there are life-altering versions, where people can experience something that changes their life for a period of time. And in some circumstances, that can be permanent, to the very transient. And we see that a lot in sports and recreation with concussions, where there may be a consequence for a few days or a few weeks, but there isn't a lasting effect. The world of traumatic brain injuries has gotten a tremendous amount of attention over the last 15 years or so, both because of what we've seen our military service members experience in recent overseas conflicts, but also in the setting of professional sports, football, not the least of which has garnered so much attention about this. And that's opened the door to this last issue that you brought up about, is there a relationship between traumatic brain injury and long-term consequences? And this nebulous term of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which is another thing that has entered the public lexicon without really there being a very strong understanding of what that means. And we have to be exceedingly careful about what the long-term implications of a concussion or repetitive exposures to traumatic injury to the brain might be. But in the grand scheme of things, we're still looking for those correlations, and fortunately, that appears to be a very, very rare manifestation of the global problem of traumatic brain injury.
I am so excited because I'm learning a lot from everybody today. So now, tell us about your TRACK TBI research study. What have you discovered that has advanced your understanding of traumatic brain injuries?
Yes, that's really been one of the great fortunes of my life, is to have been a part over the last decade of a national effort known as TRACK TBI, which is short for Transforming Research and Clinical Knowledge in Traumatic Brain Injury. Our network has grown considerably. It started with just 3 of us in Texas and San Francisco and Pittsburgh. We had some partners in New York, and then now it's grown to this national consortium of 18 participating academic health centers and a whole host of partners. And what we're doing is we're trying to bring clarity to something that you yourself brought up with your very first question, which is people hear this word traumatic brain injury and they're not quite sure what it is. And what we know is that no 2 traumatic brain injuries are alike, and we have to radically redesign the way that we think about traumatic brain injuries in order to get to the place where we can do the best for the person in front of us, irrespective of where they may fall in that pretty broad spectrum that I talked about. So TRACK TBI has been just a phenomenal, massive team sport in and of itself, bringing just some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life together as we look for these advanced ways of understanding and diagnosing traumatic brain injuries, figuring out how significant or not significant the injury is for the person in front of us, and then pivoting towards how we take that information and figure out what the single best treatments will be for each individual patient in front of us, something that we like to refer to as precision medicine.
Wow, you guys really do sound like a solid team. And hey, like all the best things, they start off small. So I just know that anybody in you guys' vicinity is going to learn a lot just in general, because you seem like a very caring person, even with just your answers with me today. So thank you. Rob, how's it going?
Good. I'm sorry that my landline's ringing right now. But anyway, I'm ready.
Concern about injury in general may never be far from the mind of an elite athlete, but what are some of the other mental health issues that are common?
Okay, well, as far as in my experience, the main driver is fear of failure that an athlete experiences. That is an absolute driver and a motivator, and also a source of worry and anxiety. But most athletes, that's part of the dynamic of the way they approach competition. Is that because especially in athletics, when you fail, it's pretty public. It's not. It just feels like everybody's watching. Everybody's seeing you miss a shot, have an opponent score on you, have to be on the losing end of a handshake at the end of a match. So it's not like it can be hidden, or that most people won't know about it the way might be the case if you do badly on an exam, for example. So I think that's also what makes it's also a motivator. It makes athletes end up playing better as well. But it's definitely part of the picture, and I think something that almost every professional competitive athlete has to deal with.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to lie. You really called me out with that one, huh? You said, Laurie's here. Let's go right for the gutter.
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really accurate. I'd say for a majority of us.
I'm not sure it's a mental health problem per se, but it's on people's mind, and it's something that you have to challenge and get challenged by and confront and deal with when you prepare for an athletic competition.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing like weekly therapy sessions for the last couple of years now, and especially doing it through Zoom. A really common topic for us is how to cope with being nervous in front of all those people at meets, because it's my biggest fear is messing up in front of all those people. And now it's not just these people, but it's televised too. So I'm glad we're able to talk about that today, because I think that's really common for a lot of us. But
and in your case,
because it's not talked about, it feels like taboo almost.
Okay, again, it's definitely there. And in the case of, you're being on that gold-winning gymnastics team, if you do badly and fall off the bars, you're taking your teammates down also.
Yep.
So,
oh yeah,
no
it's not stressful. No pressure.
But when you've got teammates depending on you not to fail, that's part of the dynamic as well.
Yeah. And now we have the pandemic, and with it, the uncertainty, the fear, difficulties focusing, which has been a very common one for me, loneliness, away from family. The major leagues have created these bubble systems in attempt to keep players safe. So how has that worked so far?
When you say the major leagues, the NBA and especially the NHL have created the bubbles. The Major League Baseball teams have not, and there have been a number of games that have been postponed this year. Two teams in particular, the Miami Marlins and the St. Louis Cardinals, both had little outbreaks at early parts of the season, and so they not only could they not play, but of course the teams they were going to play therefore couldn't play them, and the season was only 60 games to begin with about a 70-day time period. Having all those games not played compresses everything even further. And besides which, the pandemic caused many other problems in terms of sports like Major League Baseball. The fact that the games had to be so compressed means that injuries are more often a factor. And if you get injured for 2 or 3 weeks, now you're missing, 20 games, not just, 10 games or something, because there's so few off days. So anyway, the sports that have not had the bubbles have had problems. The NBA in particular, the NHL as well, but the NBA in particular did set up a bubble in Orlando, and it's worked incredibly well in the sense that there has not been any NBA player diagnosed with COVID during the several months plus that they've been doing this. It has been a strain on the players. They don't get to see their families. They don't often get to leave the bubble. They're really cooped up and insulated, and that causes its own level of stress. But in terms of protecting the athletes from getting this virus, the bubbles have actually been extremely successful.
Wow. I mean, just from what it sounds like, the fact that everybody's able to stay super safe, that's the most important part out of all of this. So that's wonderful to hear.
Right. And they've also had to, nobody's allowed to, there's no spectators at the games. There have been any number of factors that the league has had to implement in order to make sure that everybody stays safe. But that is what's happening. Of course, in the playoffs, which are happening right now, there's no real home court advantage because all the games are being played in Orlando. So having a better record than the team you're playing in the playoff doesn't help you at all because it's all played on a neutral site. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. Woo. Turning towards David, tell us about the overlap between brain injuries and other mental health challenges. If an athlete suffers from a TBI, is he or she or they more likely to develop depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a topic that our Track TBI consortium has spent a considerable amount of time focused on. I would say we've learned two basic tenets about that. The first is that for all of us, we injure the brain that we have. So for older adults who suffer a brain injury through a fall or some other mechanism, they're injuring a brain that may be dealing with some of the issues that can arise later in life with mild cognitive impairment or something to that effect. But when it comes to mental health, if someone has a mental health disorder and is dealing with an issue with depression or anxiety or some other mental health problem, and then sustains a traumatic brain injury, whether that's a concussion or something more significant, we see that those two things don't play nicely in the sandbox, and we can see an exacerbation of the underlying mental health disorder. And we've taken to view that as something called a maladaptive response. And so a person who may have his major depressive disorder under check and then sustains a traumatic brain injury is now in a position where that spirals out of control, in addition to dealing with the recovery from the traumatic brain injury. So that's on the one side, is we injure the brain that we have. And if we have a pre-existing mental health issue, it can be exacerbated in the aftermath of a traumatic brain injury. But on the other side is that traumatic brain injuries can produce this really, really fascinating set of consequences. And we have seen these really amazing examples of people who, after a traumatic brain injury, develop a skill they've never had before. So people are magically now able to play a musical instrument after never having touched an instrument in their life, or they develop linguistic skills and are accelerating in the capacity to speak multiple languages, a skill that they didn't have before their traumatic brain injury. And those are the good stories, and those are the fascinating stories. But there's a whole parallel set and a much, much longer list of stories of concerns. And so people who were in a situation where they were not facing a mental health issue develop a mental health problem in the aftermath of a traumatic brain injury. And that is the manifestation of their TBI. And we also know that approximately 30% of people who sustain a traumatic brain injury go on to meet the clinical definition of having post-traumatic stress disorder. So these are huge, huge implications. And I'll just lay one other thing, which is that almost 5 million people a year in the United States seek care for a traumatic brain injury. It is a huge public health situation. It's a public health epidemic, 5 million people a year. And all it takes is a small percentage of them to be facing a serious issue with mental health, whether that's an exacerbation of a pre-existing one or a new mental health struggle in the aftermath of traumatic brain injury, to realize that this is a major problem that we need to get much better as a country of how to help people in these situations.
David, how frequent are the good stories? I'm just curious, because I'd never even heard of that, of somebody actually having a traumatic brain injury and suddenly becoming skilled at something that they couldn't have done.
Becoming a savant. That is very rare. But it just speaks to the complete unpredictability of a traumatic brain injury, where there's only there are other issues that sort of get categorized into much more specific buckets. Knee injuries are in a relatively short list of buckets, for example. But a traumatic brain injury, it's as wide as you can imagine, and anything is theoretically possible in the aftermath of that. So I wish we had more of those amazing positive stories. Instead, we really have a public health crisis that we need to get better with.
As a professional athlete and professional gymnast, I have witnessed some quite interesting falls that resulted in some pretty heavy brain injuries. So if I've witnessed them, I can't imagine how many happen globally, by day or by year. So I'm glad we're able to raise awareness to that, because I'm sure that's really helpful, especially for those watching. Rob, you have written extensively about the mind of an athlete, the competitive pressure, and the single-minded pursuit of achievement, the pushing through pain, desire to hide any weakness. Do some of these same qualities lead athletes to not seek help when they might need it?
I think that they absolutely do. For one thing, if there's not a stigma, it's still viewed as a little bit of a sign of weakness to sort of feel like you have to ask for help. But more than that, athletes get to the level that they're at by being independent, by being self-motivated, and to have gotten to a high level, you've had to have faced a number of challenges and surmounted them. And that creates a sort of predisposition to feeling, I'm going to be able to solve this myself also. You've solved enough challenges on your own to get to a good point, to sort of feel that this is another challenge, and you are going to solve it on your own. There's a kind of independence that goes into being a good athlete that I think mitigates against a willingness to seek help, or certainly a desire to seek help.
Yeah, that's unfortunately very common. Just a reminder, today we are talking about athlete stress and traumatic brain injury with Rob Dinerman, a professional squash player, sports writer, and racket sports historian, and Dr. David Okonkwo, who is a professor of neurological surgery and director of the Neurotrauma Clinical Trial Center at University of Pittsburgh. Viewers, don't forget that you can post questions for our guests at any time. In the comments, let us know where you are writing from, and feel free to share your stories or thoughts with us. If you know anyone who can benefit from the information provided from our guest today, please share this webcast with them. So now, David, what inspired you to dedicate your life's work to the study of the brain, essentially, and brain injuries?
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable, but I have never in my entire life ever said I was ever going to be anything other than a neurosurgeon. Mm-hmm. And for the people who, my family and my friends who date back that long, they can attest to that. And a few years ago, my mother unearthed an essay I wrote when I was 8 years old, where I talked about, and the theme was "I Have a Dream," and inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech. And the dream that I described as an 8-year-old was inventing something that would help people with spinal cord injuries walk again. So I don't know where this came from, but it has been a part of me my entire life. And for me, it's a blessing. It's an honor. It's a gift. It's a privilege to be in a position to help real people with real problems, and to leverage all of these things that I've learned over the course of a lifetime, and the skills that I've gained, and the mentors who have shown me how to get better. It's just a privilege.
Wow. I mean, this is definitely your calling then, especially if you were feeling that since you were a kid. It's really interesting to see what we see in the future for ourselves as kids, because I remember my teacher for our picture day had asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I got really nervous that I would jinx the Olympics, so I told her I wanted to be an astronaut. Clearly, I didn't quite go that route, but look at you go, still staying on that track. So my child brain was something else. Oh my goodness. But yeah, this is definitely your calling, and I'm glad I get to be in your midst as you do that. So, Rob, how can we better support elite athletes' mental health and well-being?
By providing both sports psychologists and psychologists for them, and having the access be, available and ready and easy to access. That's, I think, maybe the best thing that can be done in that situation. And also, importantly, supporting athletes just in terms of their physical situation, to have trainers and doctors and others ready, because injuries are part of all of it. And if you feel that you're being taken care of on that front, you're more likely to have a good frame of mind in terms of just your confidence and ability to relate to the sport. That will make you less likely to feel that you're either depressed or anxious, or that you're failing.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree that mind and body are connected, in the sense that if I'm getting like a little tweak or ache or something in my body during practice, I'm immediately getting discouraged because I was ready to go in and have a good day, and now I have something limiting me. And if I'm not going to physical therapy or going to get it checked out and taking care of myself, that leads to quite some interesting therapy topics. And I feel quite comfortable talking about that, but I know a lot of athletes who won't talk about that, or maybe they do have access to a therapist but won't use it because, like we mentioned earlier on, asking for help is it feels like we're in such an awkward position, and I hope that changes very soon.
An awkward, vulnerable position.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it, an awkward, vulnerable position. So being able to juggle throughout the week, physical therapy and just mental therapy, it's been very helpful. So I'm glad that we're able to talk about the balance of both. Finally, David, what words of hope do you have for anyone affected by a TBI?
I would begin by saying, keep the faith, because we know that people get better, and we take care of people, and my colleagues across the country are all in the same boat. That we are often faced with insurmountable odds. We do not win every battle that we enter when trying to help patients, especially with very severe traumatic brain injuries. But we win far more frequently than people realize. And so keep the faith, and don't lose sight of the fact that when you work hard enough and are in the right environment, and have exposure to the right clinicians who care, we win far more frequently than people realize with the patients with very, very severe challenges. And for people who are more on the concussion side of the spectrum, it's unbelievable to me how often I meet someone where traumatic brain injury is an invisible injury. And they will say, it would be so much easier if my leg was broken and I was in a cast and I'm walking around on crutches. Everybody has sympathy for that person and says, oh my gosh, what happened? Are you getting better? Does it hurt? But when someone is carrying the burden and the scar of a traumatic brain injury where they know what has changed about them, but it's not visible to the person in front of them, that in and of itself is an extraordinary mental health challenge. To carry that with you every day, knowing the difference between the person you are today and the person before your injury. And to that person, I would have the same message, which is keep the faith, because we see so many of those people get better with time as well. And we have gotten so much smarter with our capacity to tailor treatments, to figure out what exactly is wrong with that person, and then tailor the treatment to that specific consequence of a traumatic brain injury for those people, and get them back much closer, if not all the way to where they were before their injuries. We get success all the time with this condition. So stay positive.
That's hopeful and so inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people are going to take so much from that, especially those who have had a traumatic brain injury. I'm sure they feel very seen, especially with someone like you who knows so much about it. So thank you. It's appreciated. Rob, I have a personal question. Tell us about your path. What led you to develop a passion for squash and pursue playing it professionally? My curiosity got the best of me. I have to know.
I'm going to do that in a second, but I just what David said really resonated. Almost everybody is fighting a struggle that other people don't see, or at least they don't easily see, and that's probably very true. With somebody with a traumatic brain injury, which is what David was talking about. But that's true. That's true, sort of more across the spectrum than I think a lot of people realize, and I think that's part of the picture. In terms of my getting involved with squash, it was an absolute fluke, which is the way a lot of people's life paths are determined. In my observation, I was in in my dorm in the room of one of my buddies on a Friday night in March of '72, and he said out of the blue, he was a club hockey player. I'd never seen him play squash. He said, "I'm going to play squash tomorrow," and it's just sort of hit me. And I just thought to myself, in that case, so am I. And after lunch the next day, we wandered over to the gym. I actually thought that that little whimsical impulse was going to have vanished by the following afternoon. But the next day we wandered over. He had a racket. I didn't. There was a place at the gym called The Pound, which loaned out aging equipment to people who wanted it. Their basketballs were so smooth that they resembled pumpernickels. I mean, you almost couldn't grasp the actual ball. The racket they gave me was so warped that it was like the bow in a bow and arrow. It was completely curved. In fact, if you hit a forehand, it was an automatic cross court. You couldn't straighten it out because not only was the shaft of the racket curved, so was the head of the racket. Anyway, so I wandered into a squash court, and in spite of that absolutely atrocious equipment, within 10 seconds after hitting the first ball, I felt like this is it. It is as close to a religious experience as I figured to ever come. I had been a pretty good ping pong player. I'd been an indifferent tennis player, and those are my only racket sports, and I wasn't that interested or that good in either one of them. But hitting that squash ball, the feeling actually made me feel giddy. I almost got dizzy. It felt so good to be hitting that squash ball with that crummy racket and a used ball. And I guess you could say things progressed from there, because 48 years later, I'm still as excited to go onto a court now as I was then. But
so began your 48-year love affair.
It was
and counting.
48 and counting. I would have thought that I'd have had my fill a long time ago. I've had a hip replacement. I've had a number of other, I paid the price for playing such a grueling game in a number of ways. But I actually was invited to play at this time this afternoon. I turned it down, and I'm very excited to be here. But the game got switched to tomorrow morning, and I can't wait to get back on the court tomorrow. Obviously, eventually I got coaches, and I made the last man on the team at Yale my freshman year, and have competed ever since, and eventually got ranked high enough in the U.S. amateur division to realize the time had come to turn pro in 1980, and I'm still on the pro doubles tour, by far the oldest member of it. And as I say, we played at the Pittsburgh Golf Club a couple of years ago in a tournament over there. And the passion was instantaneous. It was, as I say, an epiphany and perhaps even a religious experience.
Yeah, Laurie, my son had that religious epiphany for the game of squash at the age of 6. And there has been rare the day that he hasn't picked up a squash racket, and to watch the joy and the pleasure and the life lessons of winning and losing in the game of squash. It inspired me to play a sport that I didn't know when I was a child. And I would just echo what Rob is saying. And I would just give a shout out to our friends at US Squash, Kevin Klipstein and Kimberly Clearkin and Sue Venkatasan, that everyone who loves that game of squash is just waiting for the day that the sport gets to rekindle all of those amazing relationships that have been fostered through the game when we get on the backside of these very unusual times that we're facing on Earth.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, what I have to echo what David said about losing too. You show me any squash champion, and I will just show you someone who has lost a lot of matches. You do not get to that level without taking your lumps along the way too. Yeah. And part of becoming a champion is learning to deal with that and deal with the disappointment and funnel it into a positive direction.
Oh, I love that. I think that's the perfect spot to end. You three, your passion for what you do and for everything that you've talked about is absolutely contagious. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I learned so much, and I think our viewers and our listeners will get a lot from this conversation as well. All three of you are wonderful.
And Laurie, how about your passion for gymnastics that's enabled you to surmount injuries and an eating disorder and abuse of a number of different sorts, some of which you had no business having to have been exposed to, and having the Olympics changed a year on you, and you're still waiting and ready to make that team and ready to win a couple more medals next year?
I mean, this sport is crazy, but the most fun things in life are untraditional and uncommon, and, even just having a homeschool since I was a little kid, my path was already so different from all the kids around me. So everything that's flown out of place almost feels more natural, and the chaos feels comfortable because it's what I'm used to. So in terms of just getting over some crazy big and little stumps in the road. It's been quite a journey, but relying on an inner circle and growing up with my mom being a social worker, my sister's a therapist, and I speak to one. So mental health has been a huge topic in my family. And that's why doing things like this podcast or even explaining it on social media is so passionate to me, because, you know, the stigma is something that holds a lot of us back. So the more that the conversation can start and can reach other people, I think that's the best that we can do right now, especially with how crazy this year is. So we're just waiting. I think with the Olympic delay, it just makes it that much more sweeter. So we're all ready to get back out there. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. To everybody who's listening, you can post questions on onemind.org/brainwaves. I can't say it enough. You guys are wonderful. Hopefully we can all meet in person after this pandemic is over, but thank you for your time.
Thank you as well. You've done a great job hosting this.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
You're feeling anxious, afraid, alone.
I haven't been able to see my family or my friends.
Families that struggled to find mental health care before find it even harder now.
I feel a lot of guilt in not being with my family.
Are there solutions? Visit onemind.org. Seeking the answers, bringing help to the front lines. Accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.